Caught in my mom's unhealed trauma, I feel like I'm her emotional crutch, I thought after her meltdown at my daughter's party. After nearly losing her in a car accident, she blurted, "I just don't know what to do without him." Now, I'm exhausted navigating her pain. Will she ever seek help? My mother, 70 years old, and I, 43 years old, have been quite close throughout my life. She created a magical and comforting home during my childhood and was like a best friend for much of my teenage years and 20s. There were a few difficult times along the way, but we navigated them together, and I felt that we never reached a point where we weren't still supporting each other. As I matured, my mother began to share some of the traumatic experiences she had encountered throughout her life. She tended to disclose these stories after experiencing anxiety related to recent events or circumstances in her environment that reminded her of those traumas. I have always listened attentively and attempted to offer my condolences, comfort, and perspective, as I love her and want to assist her whenever possible. I have also experienced my share of trauma and have undertaken significant inner work, therapy, self-directed education, and mental restructuring to emerge stronger than ever before. It required a substantial amount of effort over the years, and I am still not completely healed, but I have progressed much further than I ever imagined possible. I pursued this healing journey not only for myself but also for my two children, as I never wanted to pass my own traumas down to them. I bring this up because, through the work I have done and my pursuit of trauma and abuse education, I have come to realize that my mother desperately needs therapy and is far from healed. It seems that over the past few years especially, it has become increasingly common for her to break down and cry at least once during most visits, regardless of our location or who is present, whenever something reminds her of a past trauma. This has occurred in restaurants, at her home during family dinners or celebrations, and when she visits my husband and me. One of the first gatherings that my parents and my current husband attended together, he and I were in a long-distance relationship for a while, was my youngest daughter's 11th birthday party at our home. As my parents exited the car, I immediately sensed that my mother was upset. Sure enough, she began crying right there in the driveway, almost before greeting my husband, because my father had said or done something that affected her negatively. This response led her to spend the entire party giving him the cold shoulder and being curt whenever he attempted to speak with her. I heard from both my mother and my father separately, recounting their respective perspectives, and I felt compelled to mediate or at least help them each understand the other's viewpoint or point out any missteps on either side. This was a recurring situation I will address later in this post. A few years ago, my mother joined me on a trip from the Midwest to the East Coast to pick up my daughters from their father's home. He has them during the summers. During the drive, my mother took over the driving for a couple of hours while I napped, enabling me to resume driving later. I was jolted awake by a significant bump and discovered that my mother had fallen asleep at the wheel and struck the guardrail on the opposite side of the road. Thankfully, there were no oncoming vehicles, and neither my mother nor I sustained serious injuries. Once I confirmed she was okay, I immediately called 911 and my mother fell into a panic attack. I had to call my father, my ex-husband, and my current husband to inform them of the situation, as well as communicate with paramedics and police officers since my mother was hyperventilating, nearly fainting, and crying, unable to speak. The car had a considerable gouge down its side, which was covered by my parents' insurance, but it was still drivable, so after we were both evaluated and the police collected our information, I took over driving for the remainder of the journey. We were only a couple of hours away from my children, so it didn't take long to reach them. During that time, I focused on reassuring my mother that it had merely been an accident, that we were both fine, and that no real harm was done. She, however, would not accept this, repeatedly blaming herself. Eventually, though she seemed to attempt to calm down, I knew deep down she was not okay. After picking up the girls, we found a nearby hotel where we could all rest and recuperate for the night. My children were excited to see their Mimi and me and to stay in a hotel. We ordered food my mother did not eat and tried to relax, but soon enough, my mother began panicking again. This escalated to the point where she was vomiting in the bathroom and fainting, and I had to call an ambulance to take her to the hospital for intravenous hydration. My daughters witnessed all of this and obviously had to accompany me while I followed the ambulance to the hospital, as we found ourselves in an unprecedented situation, and I had no idea to which hospital they were taking her. Ultimately, my mother received a couple of bags of intravenous fluids, which helped her feel much better. Afterwards, we returned to the hotel to sleep and head home the following day. About a year ago, I invited my mother to lunch because we do not often get to enjoy outings together, and I missed her company. She agreed, and we were both genuinely excited about it. My husband and my father ended up doing something together as well to bond and get to know each other better. The restaurant was delicious, and we were engaged in wonderful conversation when suddenly, something in our discussion must have triggered her post-traumatic stress disorder, causing her to tear up and speak with a shaky voice. She began discussing one of her past traumas and became so overwhelmed that I honestly feared she might scream or have a panic attack at the table. I genuinely believe she almost did, But instead, she just cried profusely and spoke about that trauma quite loudly, which I mentioned only because we were in public, and the concerned glances from nearby patrons were palpable. I managed to console her and aid her in regaining her composure. But after that, the remainder of our lunch was considerably more subdued, and I simply wanted to go home. Around Christmas, my mother invited my husband and me to sit down for a discussion, during which she immediately became upset and started crying. She wanted to gift us money for Christmas to use however we wished, but she felt a deep sense of guilt, worrying that we would perceive her as not caring for us because she was giving us money instead of physical gifts. We reassured her that we loved her and explained that money was honestly more valuable to us than gifts, as we didn't need anything other than assistance with our bills. She expressed that she understood that, but she never wanted us to think she loved us or cared for us less for giving us money rather than physical items. This reaction stemmed from her trauma. It took almost half an hour of reassurances from my father and me before she ceased crying. Once again, I was glad we could comfort her, but I felt exhausted afterward. Numerous similar incidents have taken place, but I do not feel the need to list them all, as I hope these examples provide sufficient insight into what has been occurring in recent years, and realistically, since my teenage years when my mother started opening up about her trauma. Even though this has been happening for quite some time, I think I only began to truly notice it more recently, particularly because it began occurring in front of my children and others, as well as in public, rather than just in private with me. Now my father was a significant trigger for her anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder, as he was the cause of much of it. My parents got together when they were 18 years old, and my father was incredibly immature, lacking any understanding of how to be a good husband or father. His mother, my grandmother, was a narcissist who raised him to be similar, so for 51 years, my mother endured various forms of mental, emotional, and financial abuse from my father, who did not even realize he was perpetuating it because he genuinely believed he was right about everything. He was very controlling regarding finances and often made my mother feel guilty and incorrect when she spent money on anything he deemed unnecessary, which will connect to the most recent event I will address shortly. After my grandmother passed away, things began to change. Being freed from her influence provided an opportunity for my mother, whom my father's mother had never liked, and my father to connect in ways they had not before. Through many heated and profound conversations with my mother and me over the years, my father finally started to recognize the extent of the torment he had inflicted on her. It was as though the veil of entitlement and superiority that had clouded his perspective began to lift, and he began to comprehend all the ways he had wronged my mother and caused her immense pain and anxiety. I saw him genuinely try to change his ways, but I recognized it wasn't as simple as flipping a switch to create those changes. Those were deeply ingrained habits and beliefs that required slow deconstruction and rebuilding. There was no way to instantly become better. However, he did make an effort. And despite the terrible things he had done to my mother throughout their relationship, there was another side to him that I loved dearly. I have truly never encountered another person quite like him. I have recently begun to realize that the relationships I have held with both my mother and father have been distinct from those of most people I know. We can literally discuss anything openly, honestly, and without any topic being off limits. This has been something I have always cherished, but it has also led to situations where my mother vents to me about my father, prompting me to help her understand his actions and determine how she can respond. Then my father would do the same with me regarding my mother, and I found myself mediating there as well, as both seemed completely baffled by their circumstances and unsure how to navigate them, often interpreting situations in ways that diverged significantly from one another's intentions. For a time, I enjoyed mediating these discussions because I believed I was genuinely helping. They were unaware of concepts such as gaslighting, manipulation, and narcissism until I began to educate them, based on my experience with my first husband, who had subjected me to those behaviors for nearly 11 years. I was thrilled to help enlighten them both. I had always admired my parents' relationship, as they were one of the few couples I knew who had remained together rather than divorcing. However, after learning about the various challenges my mother and father had endured both individually and together, the illusion of their perfect relationship shattered, but I still wanted to contribute to strengthening their bond, making them more united, loving, and compassionate toward one another. I never knew for certain whether my efforts had made a real impact, but it felt as if I helped in some way. A couple of years ago, my father received a diagnosis of lung cancer. There was a spot on one of his lungs that the doctors wanted to operate on immediately to prevent it from spreading. It was frightening because I had never lost anyone close to me before, and the thought of losing my father was nearly unbearable. They performed the surgery and successfully removed the cancer. We were all so relieved, and that entire experience seemed to bring my parents closer together. However, about a year ago, my father called to inform me that his cancer had returned and it was aggressive. They recommended additional chemotherapy and radiation therapy to attempt to bring it into remission, but they were uncertain about the potential outcome, as this type of cancer spread rapidly. Luckily, they had caught it early, which led to some optimism that they could get ahead of it. My father underwent chemotherapy and radiation therapy for several months, but he experienced complications with his breathing and red blood cell count during that time. He was repeatedly admitted to the hospital and the oncology center as they tried to determine what was wrong. Then in January of this year, he called me to share that the treatments had failed. The doctor estimated he had approximately 6 months to live without chemotherapy and perhaps a year with it. I was devastated. For so long, I had believed that he was cured, that we had overcome a scare and that the worst was behind us, and he would have another decade or possibly 20 years ahead of him. He chose not to continue with chemotherapy, expressing that he did not want to spend the remainder of his life feeling ill and exhausted. We all had to come to terms with his decision and support him because it was his life, and he deserved to make that choice for himself. After that, he deteriorated quickly. My mother was heartbroken but also determined not to spend every remaining moment with him consumed by sadness and tears. They spent a lot of time simply being together. For about a month, they were still able to dine out at restaurants or explore antique shops until my father became too weak and tired to continue. At that point, they stayed home and spent quality time talking, watching television, and planning for the future. My father passed away in early March. We were all devastated, but no one more so than my mother. She and my father had been together for 51 years and married for 48, and she had never been alone before. Understandably, her grief was profound, but she also felt a sense of relief that he was no longer suffering and that it was finally over. The fear she had lived with since my father's diagnosis was now a reality, as she no longer had to witness him wasting away, struggling to breathe or struggling to eat. It had come to an end. Part of her grieving process involved trying to remove as many of my father's belongings from her house as possible because seeing them daily was too painful, knowing he would never return to use any of them again. I visited her a couple of times to help her sort through things or simply to sit with her and talk. During this period, it was natural for her to cry frequently due to her loss. However, sometimes her tears stemmed not solely from her sorrow over my father's passing. For instance, she would express a desire to purchase a new couch, since my father had spent his final months lying on the couch they had shared, and she could not bear the thought of sitting on it again without him. But she felt as though he was in her head, telling her she should not spend money on something unnecessary, which caused her immense anxiety. The same anxiety surfaced when she discussed wanting a new desk for her office because theirs was small and cluttered. Each time I reassured her that my father no longer had any concerns regarding earthly matters, especially money, and I was confident he would want her to be happy, healthy, and to have the things she desired and needed. I understand that simply saying something like this doesn't always provide comfort, and I am not naive in that regard. Still, I felt the need to try because she did not deserve to spend the rest of her life anxious every time she wanted to use her own money for something. While she seemed to understand this truth to some degree, she expressed that after so many years of receiving feedback from him about her spending habits, she could not shake that nagging feeling. I assured her that I comprehended her struggle, as I did, since my ex-husband had also been financially controlling. And I explained that this feeling would likely begin to dissipate as she experienced that spending money imposed no negative consequences or reactions from anyone. Fast forward to a few days ago. My oldest daughter, 15 years old, called my mother to ask if they could have a sleepover at her house. Since my father's death, my mother had not been inclined to host anything like that understandably, and my children missed her. My mother agreed and was pleased to have some distraction now that she was living alone and had been struggling to sleep at night. She also invited us to dinner before the girls went with her for the night, offering to treat us, and we accepted. After picking my husband up from work, we all headed to the city where my mother lives to meet her at the restaurant. It was a chain with 2 locations in the city. I mistakenly went to the wrong location, and when I didn't see her car, I called to check in. Upon answering, I could already sense her mood was off, causing my stomach to sink. It turned out I was at the wrong location, so I apologized and let her know I would head to the correct one and see her in about 10 minutes. When we arrived, my mother got out of the car, and after my daughters hugged her, I noticed she was tearing up. I approached her and embraced her, quietly assuring her that if the sleepover didn't seem like a good idea, that it was entirely okay and we could try another time. She expressed that she was happy to have them over, as it gave her something to focus on during this time, so we proceeded inside. As we waited in line to place our orders, my mother began to cry. I turned to her, and she explained that seeing the menu filled her with sadness because of all the things my father used to order. I acknowledged her feelings and reassured her that I understood. After we finished eating and settled at our table, the conversation turned lighthearted and the mood seemed to improve. My mother planned to take them to the grocery store for snacks. She had arranged one of her rooms so they could watch a horror movie together, and the following day she intended to take the kids to the movies. It sounded as if they were going to have a wonderful time. As we wrapped up our meal and prepared to leave, my mother suddenly exclaimed, "Oh my God, I almost forgot to tell you I had a hallucination the other day." We were all intrigued and I felt a twinge of concern and asked her to elaborate. She instructed the girls to proceed to her car, which was unlocked, while she took a moment with us. The girls went to the parking lot, closed the doors, and my mother, my husband, and I paused in the restaurant entryway to hear about her experience. She described how she went into the kitchen to get a glass of water, filled it, and as she lifted it to her lips, she felt something on her arm. When she looked down, she saw ants covering her arm and crawling inside the glass. She swiftly threw the cup into the sink and turned on the water again, but when she looked, there were no ants. I was uncertain about how to react, so I remained silent for a moment. Fortunately, my husband chimed in, mentioning that he had experienced hallucinations during bouts of severe insomnia. She nodded in acknowledgement and noted how strange it was, as she had never experienced anything like that before. Then she grew quite upset, voicing her confusion about what to do now that my father was no longer there to provide her guidance. I reassured her that she did not need him to tell her what to do because she was capable of making her own choices. She mused on why my father had visited my youngest daughter in a dream yet had not come to her to indicate whether she was making the right decisions. As a side note, a few weeks prior, my youngest daughter had dreamt that her pawpaw came to her so she could hug him again. She stated that he looked the way he used to look before he became ill, and I had shared this with my mother as the two shared a special connection. I suggested that perhaps this was intentional. Maybe my father did not visit her to dictate her choices because now she had the chance to make her own decisions about how to live her life, and he did not want to interfere. She cried more, her eyes widening as she exclaimed, "But I don't want him to be mad at me." I reassured her saying, "Mom, he is not going to be mad at you. It isn't like that anymore and he is not here. You have the freedom to make your own choices now and there is no one who will declare what you choose as wrong or bad." She responded, "But how do I know that? I don't want to do anything that would upset him." I explained that it was not healthy to live that way, especially since, at this point, she had no choice but to make her own decisions. She replied, "Yes, but when he was here, I always looked to him to tell me if I was making the right decisions." I answered, "And that was not healthy then either." At that moment, she seemed to become frustrated, opened the exit door, and walked toward her car. I recognize that she is still in the grieving process. I also understand how post-traumatic stress disorder functions, as I have it too, although not to the extent that she does anymore. However, while we were standing there trying to navigate the situation, other patrons were entering the restaurant, and the entryway was quite small, necessitating us to step aside for others, while our children waited alone in the parking lot. At that point, my husband and I walked to our car and drove home. I was uncertain about how to respond or what to do. I felt as if perhaps I should not have reassured my mother in the manner that I did or that I had said the wrong thing. However, I had felt compelled to provide her with a sense of reality. I waited until the following day after my mother dropped the children off at our house. She did not come inside and departed before I heard the girls enter, and sent her a message thanking her for having the girls for the night and apologizing for upsetting her during our conversation. I indicated that it had not been my intention to hurt her feelings. She read the message but did not respond, and since then I have not heard from her. I am uncertain about what to do next. I genuinely care for my mother, but I am also exhausted from dealing with these recurring situations repeatedly. She has refused to attend therapy despite my numerous recommendations. She previously saw a therapist who was helping her, but when her insurance changed, she needed to find someone else. Rather than pursue this, she simply stopped attending therapy sessions. She claims she does not want to return to therapy, fearing she will not find a therapist she likes. My argument has always been that there are countless therapists in her vicinity, and that even if the first one does not suit her, there will be others who do. She merely needs to be patient and take that first step. Unfortunately, she remains unwilling to do so. I often find myself frustrated at times for feeling as if she is imposing her trauma upon me, especially when it unfolds in front of my children. Perhaps this isn't fair, as I understand that trauma responses can arise anywhere at any time for various reasons. However, the reality that she refuses to assist herself in coping with her issues means that each time I see her in person, there exists a risk of her becoming upset. This realization greatly frustrates me. I do not want to carry that burden. Perhaps that makes me an unkind person, but I truly do not know how to navigate this situation or where to go from here. Story 2. Stuck in a 3-year toxic cycle, I told Flower, "I can't keep doing this," yet each breakup attempt crumbled with her tears. Now, as I fall for a classmate, I'm torn. Can I really add to her pain? My heart races as I ponder my next move. Will I ever find the courage to break free? I am expressing my frustration here because I genuinely feel like I have no one else to confide in about this matter. I have felt like a failure for resorting to artificial intelligence chatbots out of desperation, while hoping to hear from real people. This will be lengthy, but it is relatively brief compared to how much I could elaborate on this situation, and many details are omitted. I am not seeking advice, as I already know what needs to be done, but I lack the emotional fortitude to take action. For the sake of anonymity, I will refer to my partner as Flower. I am a college student who has been in a relationship with my girlfriend Flower for 4.5 years. Like many relationships, ours was promising in the beginning but gradually deteriorated. It fluctuates. There are times when things feel genuinely good and times when they feel frighteningly bad, yet I have long sensed that something is amiss. After we graduated from high school, she moved with me to my college apartment and assured me she would enroll in the community college in town. However, from the very first day of cohabitation, she would never leave my side. She would accompany me to campus every day, sit outside the classrooms until my classes finished, sit with me for hours while I studied independently, and tag along without asking to everything I attended. I felt as though I was not permitted to have a life outside of her, and she would easily become upset over trivial matters, such as if I had a group project that included another female classmate, though she has significantly improved in this regard recently and has repeatedly apologized for her past behavior. Unsurprisingly, she never attended the community college and has had intermittent jobs over the past 3 years. Occasionally, she attempts to paint or write a short story but gives up very quickly. When she is not mimicking my activities, most days she stays in bed on her phone. She has constructed her life entirely around me, despite repeated warnings from me and my family. She was raised by an abusive single mother and endures substantial childhood trauma. I have my own trauma, but not to the extent she does. I still love her and truly believe she is a selfless and wonderful person, but the trauma profoundly influences her interactions with me. This is not an excuse for her behavior, but I want to clarify that the issues in our relationship do not stem solely from her actions, as I also failed to recognize how this situation has affected her for a long time. At the end of my first semester in college, I felt overwhelmed. After a great deal of contemplation, I came home after a shift at my part-time job and told her that I wanted to end our relationship. Naturally, she broke down crying, and I did not anticipate how deeply it would hurt me to witness her anguish. Thus, like a coward, I withdrew my request and suggested we could work things out. I had deceived myself into focusing only on the positive aspects of our relationship. This was the first instance in a cycle that would repeat multiple times. After this initial incident, I inevitably became disillusioned a few months later and would attempt to end things again, resulting in the same outcome. There was one moment when I felt extremely low and reluctantly sought help from friends and family. They supported me, physically removed her belongings from my apartment as respectfully as possible, and after much stalling, she was finally gone. I felt devastated yet relieved, and they stayed with me throughout the weekend to lift my spirits. However, the feeling of emptiness intensified. Eventually, a day after they left, I foolishly caved and called her to come back. Following this nearly broken relationship, things improved temporarily, but in hindsight, I believe it merely initiated a second honeymoon phase. To this day, I harbor a profound hatred for myself for making this decision because I could not bear the loneliness. Though they never voiced it, I have always felt ashamed, and I know I let my friends down by returning to her after they had done so much for me. I do not know if I will ever forgive myself for this. I refuse to allow myself to be placed in this situation again. I cannot ask them for assistance anymore because I fear that I will allow the same outcome to unfold. In the past few months, I have felt my mental health steadily decline. Not only has the relationship been challenging, but I have also been encountering various life struggles, including issues surrounding my identity, financial concerns, and experiencing anxiety about the future of the world, though that is easier to dismiss compared to my more personal challenges. During my freshman year, I was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder (ADHD), which has made me reassess my entire life. Growing up, I never suspected that I was neurodivergent. I recognized that I struggled significantly in social situations, but whenever I brought this up with trusted adults, they would be dismissive, telling me that I would grow out of it or that I was just shy and needed to step out of my comfort zone. I consistently followed that advice and forced myself into social situations, even when I felt uncomfortable. While I have made improvements, it still requires immense effort and often causes discomfort. I sought the ADHD evaluation because I realized I was having a hard time focusing in lectures. Having never studied and achieved good grades during K-12, college forced me to study for the first time. Initially, I thought ADHD was a simple concept, just a disability that made it more challenging to focus and caused overthinking. Now it has clarified many behaviors from my upbringing that I could never explain, but it still does not account for everything. I suspect that I may also have autism spectrum disorder (ASD) along with ADHD, but I cannot afford an evaluation, so I will refrain from making that claim until I consult a professional. This reevaluation of my life has also led me to recognize that my parents were worse parents than I had believed, and many of their actions likely contributed to the issues I face today. They were not physically abusive, but they were emotionally neglectful and often treated me as though I were younger than my age. I did not recognize this as a child and always thought I should be thankful for the parents I had because some people had it far worse. About a month ago, I felt something I had not experienced in a long time. I realized I was developing romantic feelings for a classmate, and it felt as though I was truly alive when I interacted with them. I felt guilty and ashamed upon recognizing my feelings, and I have no intention of pursuing that individual or any other relationship for quite some time, but it made it clear to me that I truly need to end my current relationship. Therefore, with great reluctance, I sat down with Flower and told her that I was developing feelings and that we needed to stop pretending that everything was fine and finally end our relationship. She initially accepted my feelings, but naturally she began to break down and cry once again. I have made some progress in not taking responsibility for her reaction, but another issue continues to impede my ability to follow through with the breakup. Her mother is financially unstable and is currently living in a motel with their pets, supposedly moving into an apartment soon, though I do not have details regarding that situation. If I break up with Flower, she will be forced into this living arrangement, and I fear that she will be severely disadvantaged for the rest of her life, assuming she does not harm herself further without me. Her mother is extremely controlling and forbids her from attending therapy or school, instead compelling her to work at her retail job and pay the bills, which would only worsen her mental health. Flower lacks the ability to drive and does not own a car. We reside in a region where being reliant on a car is the norm, so she would need her mother to take her anywhere. She has no one and nothing else to rely on apart from me and her mother, and I genuinely see no way for her to heal effectively from this breakup if she returns to her mother's home. I understand that it is not my fault that she is in this situation, and I recognize that I should not be financially responsible for her at this stage of life. But at the same time, it feels incredibly wrong to disregard someone else's suffering. I would not wish such a situation upon my worst enemy. However, I must acknowledge that I cannot allow her to bring me down with her. This is presently the primary factor preventing me from finalizing the breakup. If I knew that she had at least some kind of support system apart from me, I believe I could endure her tears. But just knowing that I am her entire world and that I would be taking that away from her makes it increasingly difficult. For the past 2 weeks, I have felt as if I have been trapped in a cycle. We have experienced some of our worst arguments during this time, and I have regrettably said things I now wish I could take back. I wake up and spend most of the daylight hours on campus, not texting her at all, distracting myself with my academic work while also allowing myself to feel sad and process the situation. I have never felt so free before and have never had this much control over my life, but inevitably the daylight fades and the anticipated darkness descends. I mentally tell myself, okay, tonight is the night. But you can guess what happens when I return home at night. I believe she is experiencing a significant degree of denial because every time I return home, she seems genuinely happy to see me, as if we are not caught in this cycle. I explain what needs to happen and ask her to create a plan to move out as soon as possible. Yet she begins to break down and brings up various issues, causing me to relent. I have been trying so hard to articulate what I need to convey and then disengage, attempting to use headphones and ignore her or pretend she is not present, but it is nearly impossible to do so in our small room. I am unable to carry on like this and feel like a complete failure. I am trapped in the same loop, and it is my fault for not breaking free. Furthermore, our arguments have worsened over time. A few nights ago, she suddenly lashed out at me, accusing me of being selfish and terrible, claiming that men are awful, which was very out of character for her. Her words and tone made me break down, evoking painful childhood memories of verbal abuse. I cried and begged her to stop, telling her that this was not who she truly is. And after about 20 minutes, she eventually snapped out of it, apologized, and began to hate herself for her behavior. It has recently become evident to me that I have been suppressing a significant amount of resentment towards her over the years, which is why I've often felt anger and frustration when she did little things I disliked, such as asking me about my day when I did not feel like discussing it. That night, I do not know if her words affected me or what, but after a while I began to display the same behavior she had, lashing out at her and demanding that she pack her belongings and leave or that I would call the police. Upon saying that, she started to pack, but I stopped her and apologized for saying it. I felt out of control and was disgusted with myself for behaving this way, especially since I wanted to navigate the breakup with compassion. I need to disengage, as every conversation devolves into an argument and nothing productive ever results from it. I have pleaded with her to let me go and asked her why she is putting me through this and why she won't end things if I have repeatedly expressed my unhappiness. She always responds with something about how she hopes things will get better, that she wants to give it one more month, suggesting that I am only ending things because of the feelings I have for my classmate, that I just want to explore other options, or that I am simply going through a difficult period and taking it out on her. She always finds a way to rationalize the situation. Things were certainly looking up before this cycle began, and I genuinely wish I still had the desire to maintain the relationship, because I still love her. However, seeing the detrimental impact this relationship is having on both of us convinces me that staying will lead to catastrophic consequences for both parties. We both have a history of passive suicidal ideation, her for reasons separate from me, and me for various reasons that include this relationship. And my greatest fear is that she might act on those thoughts while living with her mother. Conversely, if I continue to stay, I worry that I too will be pushed to my limits, even though I have never once felt a genuine urge to act on those thoughts. It is utterly heartbreaking to witness her in this shattered state. It seems as though her mind cannot accept that her world is crumbling, leading her to delude herself. Even worse, I find myself blaming myself, even though I am certain that anyone I ask would tell me it is not my fault. I just cannot regulate my emotions. Although I am aware of what course of action I need to take, I am uncertain about what I will do moving forward. At present, I am on my campus as I write this, cherishing the remaining daylight hours. It is likely that the usual pattern will unfold. I will head home at night and provide minimal responses to her because I no longer see the point in attempting to initiate a breakup, given that it always ends in the same manner. I am hopeful that by some miracle she will suddenly have a support system independent of me, or that perhaps I will magically regain the desire to remain in the relationship. I understand that I will only continue to suffer the longer this situation persists. Yet my cowardice prevents me from confronting the painful emotions, so I suppose I will have to bear the consequences for a decision I made as a teenager. I will require extensive therapy following this if it ever concludes. I never imagined that I would find myself in such a predicament. Even though I am using a throwaway account, I fear that she may see this post as she has access to my tablet at home and I received an email notification for creating this account. Nonetheless, I am posting it anyway because I need to express my feelings. I am not seeking advice, but I would genuinely appreciate some kind and understanding words, as I have never felt this lonely in my life. Conversely, if you believe I am a terrible person, you are free to voice that opinion as well. Story 3. Caught in the chaos of divorce, my mother's midlife crisis, my father's despair, and my role in the family breakdown. You'll regret love breaking your heart, he warned, unaware I'm supporting mom's escape. How can I shield my little siblings from this turmoil? Hey everyone's. I hope that whoever is reading this is leading a happy and peaceful life. This is my first time posting here, so if I offend anyone with the way I express myself, I sincerely apologize. I made a mistake in the title. My father's gender is male. As the title indicates, my parents are currently experiencing a difficult time. To provide some background, they have been happily married for 26 years and I am the oldest child in the family. I have two younger siblings, a brother and a sister, who are both 9 years old. My parents have now been separated for 6 months. My mother is presently living with a family friend and neighbor who resides across the street. She has declined to speak directly with my father for some time. The only communication between them occurs through messages. In many circumstances, my mother will not even remain in the same room as my father. At the end of this month, I will be assisting her in moving into another house we own, although it is somewhat far from our current residence. I suppose that implies they are officially separated now. Honestly, I am running out of friends to seek advice and support from, so I am posting here to ask. Does anyone have any suggestions for how I can help them potentially reconnect or heal their relationship? I will be sharing more details and personal thoughts in the next part. If you would prefer not to read all of it, I have included a brief summary at the end. Please feel free to skip ahead to the section after the dashed lines. I kindly request that anyone reading this exercise some patience, as I believe it is important to provide the full picture. A little about my family. I am a 26-year-old son. Yes, I am unemployed, overweight, and I spend a lot of time playing video games in the basement. My younger brother and sister are turning 10 this year. They are cute and adorable, which certainly warrants mentioning. They are completely unaware of what is happening, as all the family members have tried to keep the situation hidden from them. My father is a high school teacher in our small town, and my mother works at our church. Yes, my entire family is Christian, and that has actually caused more problems. I'm not exactly sure when this all started, but I am quite certain it became serious around last autumn. At that time, my mother's cousin was getting married on the West Coast, and both of my parents, along with my brother and sister, flew out for the weekend. I did not accompany them, to be honest. I thought it would be a nice break where I could just play video games all day without anyone, especially my mother, nagging me about it. Now I really regret not going. I picked them up from the airport that Monday night, and the atmosphere in the car was dreadful. My father began yelling at me because I took the wrong highway, making the trip home a bit longer. My mother did not say a word the entire time. I had hoped she would speak up or defend me, but she remained frustratingly silent. A few days later, I began hearing them argue at night after my little brother and sister went to bed around 8:30. Sometimes I could hear them fighting just outside my room or near the windows. My father even started waking up in the middle of the night to come downstairs and check on me, at times around midnight or 2 a.m., which was just odd. Then before December, my mother moved out. It really shocked me. I did not see it coming. She only took some basic items and left to stay at a friend's place. I asked her why she was leaving, but she told me to respect their boundaries, so I did not press the issue. My father has been very distant. He barely talks to me and spends most of his time at work. He has been paying more attention to my brother and sister. One night after we finished washing the dishes, he snapped and yelled at me in the kitchen. Since that incident, I have taken over much of the cleaning and cooking at home now that my mother is not there anymore. She still visits occasionally, mainly to see my little brother and sister. Since then, my parents have only communicated through text messages. For Christmas, I had to choose which side of the family to visit for the first time. I ended up with my mother's side while my siblings went with my father. Honestly, it was probably the worst Christmas I have ever experienced. My mother gave me a baby toy as a gift, and I was utterly confused about how to react. A few weeks ago, my grandfather passed away, which completely shattered my family's heart. My father was particularly affected. He was just absent emotionally. That night, he drove all the way to the hospital without informing me. The only message I received from him was asking me to help take my little brother and sister to school the next morning. The following day, my mother came home to care for them. For a brief moment, I actually thought things might return to normal. 2 days later, I drove my mother, brother, and sister to the funeral. Before the service, the entire family gathered at my grandfather and grandmother's home for lunch, but my mother refused to enter. She later explained that it was because my father had been gossiping about her to his side of the family, and she didn't feel safe around them. That was the moment I chose a side. I left with my mother and we had lunch together, just the two of us. She cried in the car while I was driving. She told me she no longer wants to be with my father and that she does not love him. She mentioned that she cannot sleep in the same bed or even live in the same house with him. I attempted to comfort her, but I was honestly shocked. I had no idea how serious things had become. After we had eaten, my mother wanted to have a drink before the funeral. I accompanied her to a nearby bar and she downed a shot to cope with everything, as she put it. I drove her to the funeral afterward. She sat next to my father and the kids, which I now realize might be the last time. She agreed to sit with him during the ceremony, but she refused to go up with him when he delivered his speech. The rest of the day remains a blur. So many friends and relatives attended the funeral. My cousins asked why I didn't join them for lunch, and I told them the truth. I had lunch with my mother elsewhere. I was frustrated, sweating in my black suit, and my tie was choking me. My father was crying and sobbing throughout, completely broken. After the funeral, things deteriorated. Initially, my parents had planned for me to drive my father home while my mother would take my brother and sister in a separate vehicle. But at the last minute, my father changed his mind. He wanted to ride with my mother and the children. My mother calmly refused. She barely said anything except, "No, please stop," and we already decided. In the parking lot, many of my parents' friends stood around us. I ended up physically positioned between my parents. My father was looking directly at me, his eyes filled with indignation and distress. My mother was behind me. I am slightly taller than my father, while my mother is shorter than both of us. My little brother and sister watched everything from the open door of the van. For that moment, I genuinely believed my father was going to hit me like he has done before. I stood still, prepared for it. But then I think he realized we were surrounded by people and he backed down. The drive home was utter silence. He did not say a word, and neither did I. It was likely the longest, heaviest day of my life, and I am still missing my grandfather at this very moment. Yesterday, my father and I were sitting by the fire in the backyard. He opened up to me and expressed that he feels he did everything right, but that my mother has changed, and now he has no idea how to fix the situation. He was emotional, and I could tell he felt utterly lost. Before this conversation, my mother had already shared her perspective of the story with me. She told me that when she left, my father called both sets of their parents to discuss it, crying on the phone and telling them she left him. To add context, my mother's father passed away a few years ago, and her mother, my grandmother, now lives alone. Hearing all this, both sets of parents sided with my father. They were heartbroken and essentially demanded that my mother return to him. According to her, he used their emotions to manipulate them into taking his side. He also informed the rest of the family that she left him without any reason, resulting in nearly everyone supporting him and pressuring her to return. It turns out that after their trip to the wedding last autumn, my parents actually tried marriage counseling and attended some support groups through the church. But instead of helping, it added fuel to the fire. My mother claims my father refused to change anything, and the sessions only increased the tension. Now she feels like she is being judged constantly, particularly at church, where everyone is aware of our family situation. People are always prying into her affairs and pushing her to reconcile with my father. It has become so overwhelming that we stopped attending church. I still go occasionally, but to a different one where no one knows me. All the pressure from my father, the family, the church, and friends has turned against my mother. People accuse her of being selfish or irresponsible for choosing to leave the marriage. However, her response to this has been somewhat rebellious. She got a new tattoo which her mother despises, a nose piercing her first, and has begun living a completely new lifestyle. From what I have observed on her social media, there is definitely more drinking and potentially other changes I am not entirely aware of. She confided in me that my father is one of the most passive-aggressive individuals she has ever known. He places all the pressure on her while still managing to present himself as this calm, loving, and supportive husband to everyone else. Honestly, I somewhat agree with that perspective. She stated that she is tired of his controlling attitude and feels as though she is undergoing a midlife crisis in addition to everything else. Returning to last night by the fire, my father cried once again. He expressed that he does not understand why she left or how to convince her to change her mind. He told me he has tried everything and nothing has worked. He said it is unfair that he is left to raise the children alone and that he does not deserve any of this. Then he looked me in the eye and cautioned, "Think twice before you get married or fall in love because they will just break your heart." What he does not know is that I have already agreed to help my mother move to her new place at the end of the month. I have not yet told him this, and I genuinely do not know how. That is essentially everything I wanted to share. I have no idea how many words I just wrote, but if you have made it this far, thank you. Seriously, I am very grateful. It is honestly a bit embarrassing and frustrating to lay all of this out there because, truth be told, I do not enjoy discussing my feelings. My father raised me to believe that a man should always conceal his emotions, so this was not easy. At present, it feels like only my uncle, my mother's brother, and I are truly supporting her. Everyone else who knows about the situation seems to be siding with my father. It is tough, and I feel far too young to be experiencing all of this. And yes, for the record, I have never had a girlfriend. I have been on a few dates but never had anything serious or intimate. However, please do not label me as an involuntary celibate or anything. I promise that is not who I am. The reason I do not want them to separate is that my little brother and sister do not deserve this. They should not have to be the ones caught in the middle of this whole mess. TLDR. My parents have gone through 2 months of marriage counseling, and it is not working. They have also participated in support groups from my local church, and that is also not working. They both have their sides of the story, but I am now more aligned with my mother's perspective. The primary reason I do not want them to separate is for the sake of my little brother and sister. They do not deserve any of this. They should not have to be the ones caught in the middle of this entire mess. I am open to any kind of advice and I genuinely appreciate your attention. Thank you.